Using sources is one of the most important and challenging aspects of this course. There's actually a lot of different, there are a lot of different skills and sub-skills that go into effectively using sources. So today I'd like to introduce one set of skills. Hopefully we'll work on them for a while and then they'll get to be natural, and then we'll introduce other skills later on. So using sources one. This is why it's going to be the first one. It's going to be the first of a series of PowerPoints and lessons on using sources. The first thing to do to think about sources is to think about why you're using them. Of course, I know you're using them because your teacher requires you to use them. But in a natural, effective way of writing, people use sources all the time, and they use it very effectively, not just to impress their teacher. They use it mainly as evidence for their claim. That's the number one best thing you can use sources for. So if you can get specific facts, evidence, statistics, research studies, things like that are very effective uses of sources. Another kind of evidence is expert testimony. So expert testimony means someone who is an expert in the field and has done research and has published at a very high level. They say this is the conclusion of all their research that they've done. That makes a good a source of evidence. So you can cite the testimony or the opinions or the claims of experts in their field, only in their field. So if I can cite Einstein for physics, but I can't cite Einstein for economics. It was with an economist, okay? Other ways to use sources are to explain an important theory or explain an argument or a key term or some important background information. We'll be talking about dealing with opponents' arguments later in the semester, but it can be really effective to quote your opponent or cite your opponent's opinion and then go and kind of refute that opinion. You can also use sources like as a nice quote at the end or the beginning of your essay to lead into or to close up your essay. And of course, you want to impress your teacher. No problem doing that, right? Bad reasons to use sources. Don't just cite people's opinions or generalizations. You want to avoid that. Unless they're experts, but the experts have to be narrowly focused, telling about the conclusions of their particular research they've done, not just any opinions and generalizations. Don't cite common knowledge. Don't cite topic sentences or thesis statements. It should be specific facts you're getting from your sources. Let's take a look at some examples. I'd like you to read these sentences and decide, is this a good use of a source or not? Take a couple minutes to pause the video and answer for yourself. All right, so sentence one, we cannot always avoid stress in our lives. Not a good use of source. You know that already. It's already pretty common knowledge. Even if a writer says it, it doesn't require the expert for that. Number two, according to Freud, there are several ways that the ego protects itself from stressful threats, and these are called defense mechanisms. That's good information to cite. That's something, it's not common knowledge. It summarizes kind of a whole bunch of theory from Freud. Perfect. Number three, this is very good. This is a specific fact or information. It's evidence you can use in the body of your essay to show that stress is increased. Number four is not a good use of source. Now, when I say it's not a good use of source, doesn't mean you can't include it in your essay, but put it as your own words. You write that. That's your own sentence. Number five, same thing. Everybody knows stress is uncomfortable. You can say it, that's fine, but don't quote anybody on it. That's ridiculous, okay? Number six, that's good. This is kind of an over summary of Leahy's kind of kind of the 3 points he discusses in one part of his essay. And that's a good thing. That's a great use of source. Now let's talk about ways to use sources. How do you incorporate them in? Most common is direct source quotes. It's most common by students, not the most common by professional writers. Professional writers will use, really skilled writers will use direct quotes now and then if they're very important and very well said. 7 years ago, that's a direct quotable quote, right? But what you want to try to use are some of these other techniques where you're using more of your own words, blended quotes, paraphrases, summaries, and just picking information, data. So let me give you an example. So here's a direct quote. According to Benjamin B. Leahy, 3 effective coping strategies involve changing how we think about the stressful event, focusing attention away from stressful events that cannot be changed, and religious coping. So a couple things to notice about this direct quote. Notice the little phrase here, according to Benjamin B. Leahy. This is called a signal phrase. This is a transition into the quote, and it also shows where the source is coming from. And oftentimes you'll give the credentials of the person. At least the first time you mention that person's name, you'll give the credentials. That's called a signal phrase. We're going to look at those more later. Notice the punctuation. So after my signal phrase, I'll put a comma and then my quote marks. So notice the comma comes first and then the quote, and capital letters. I'm going to use capital letters here. And then I'm going to put the period first and then the quote. Unless I have to use a citation. If I have to use parentheses, it'll go after the parentheses. Make sure it's accurate. I've seen students who just use direct quotes and they misquote. That's awful, okay? Word for word, you shouldn't miss anything. But again, I want to really emphasize, avoid overusing direct quotes. Try to use more of these others. Blended quote. This is a mix of your language with the source. So here's an original quote. Our cognitions are intimately linked to our reactions to stressful events, and a number of effective methods of coping involve cognitive strategies. Here's a blended quote. It includes your language or my language plus the quoted material, because the way we think is, quote, intimately linked to our reactions to stressful events, comma, quote. Leahy points out that we can deal with stress by changing how we view the situation. So notice this is a blended quote. I'm mixing the author's words with my words. The author's words have to go in quote marks. Don't unquote those. Then I got plagiarism if I leave those unquoted. But if I have that little phrase in there in the midst of my sentences, that's beautiful. It's an elegant technique, helps you take ownership of the material, helps you make it yours. It's really, really a nice thing I recommend. Another thing you can do is just a straight out paraphrase, where you take the whole sentence and you put it in your own words. Be careful how you do it. Paraphrase does not mean just substituting words in and out with keeping the same sentence structure. With a paraphrase, you're using your own sentence structure. You're digesting it and you're producing it entirely original. No 2 paraphrases should be the same for any significant amount of writing. Here's the original quote. 3 effective coping strategies involve changing how we think about the stressful event, focusing attention away from stressful events that cannot be changed, and religious coping. Here's a good paraphrase. According to Leahy, we can deal with stress by changing our perspective, refocusing our minds, or appealing to spiritual beliefs. This is very nicely done. It takes that same information and it's totally written by the writer, not by the original source, okay? Very nice. Here's a bad paraphrase because it just substitutes words. 3 successful coping techniques involve changing how we contemplate the stressful event, directing attention away from nerve-wracking events that cannot be changed, and religious managing. This is terrible. It doesn't really make much sense because the words don't really translate that exactly, but it's using the exact same sentence structure. That's a bad paraphrase. You can also summarize a large section. According to Freud, there are several ways that the ego protects itself from stressful threats, which are called defense mechanisms, and include displacement, sublimation, projection, reaction formation, regression, rationalization, repression, denial, and intellectualization. This is summarizing a whole huge section of Benjamin B. Leahy's article on coping with stress. It takes probably 7, 8 paragraphs and compresses it into one sentence. It's a good way to cover a wide range of text. Just make sure it's accurate. If you're using a key term like sublimation, I don't need to use quote marks there, even though that term comes directly from the article. It's just a one-word concept. I don't need to do that. You can also just pick details, okay? Approximately 330 million people live in the United States. I can just get that information without any of the sentence structure that goes with it. So I read about that somewhere. I just put that number in there. I could just use a number, percentage, that kind of thing. So some important rules for incorporating these sources. First of all, make sure you choose relevant information. That's crucial. Don't just drop a bomb. I'll show you about this. An easy technique is a source sandwich. You want to try to use a signal phrase. We've seen those before. Don't put the title and the publication information. Use good verbs and watch your punctuation. So let's look at each of these really quickly. Choose relevant information. Here's good use. One of my favorite techniques of dealing with stress is to immerse myself in sports. This can help because it helps refocus my mind off of the stressful situation, which, according to Leahy, can be associated with less depression and better physical health. This is a good use of the source. It's a blended quote. It's specific facts based on Leahy's extensive research. Perfect, okay? And I've got this little signal phrase there. And the other thing is it's relevant. It's related back to my point about sports. Here's a bad use. There are many ineffective ways of coping with stress. According to Freud, the ego possesses a small arsenal of defense mechanisms. Well, how are those connected? Are the defense mechanisms ineffective ways? Are they effective? Are they related at all? I don't know. You're just kind of dropping this information in without a clear connection. It's not clearly relevant. Don't drop a bomb. With a bomb, you're writing your own words along and you just drop a quote in, boom, and then you go on your own merry way. There are many negative ways of coping with stress. Boom, it appears that many individuals cope ineffectively with stress by using tobacco, alcohol, and other drugs to soothe their emotional reactions to stress. One way that I try to avoid is excessive eating. Whoa, there's a whiplash of ideas. You're just slamming your reader with this quote in there. Not well done. A very easy technique you can use to avoid dropping bombs is to use the source sandwich. Begin with your generalization first. In the middle, you put your source, and then comment, follow up, give an example, transition into another idea afterwards. So there's you before and you after with the source in between. Here's an example. A common technique for dealing with stress is sublimation. There's me. That's my topic sentence say. According to Freud, sublimation involves reducing the stress of prohibited impulses by converting the impulses into socially approved activities. Now, here's my source, and now I follow that up with an example. For instance, when I get angry with my boss, I exercise vigorously, blah, 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 blah. That's a source sandwich. Very effective technique. Signal phrases. You want to try, you don't have to every time do this, but it's a good idea to, at least the first time you're introducing a new author, include the signal phrase. This will include the author's name. It could be the last name only, could be the first and last, but never just the first name. And the author's credentials are often included. You can use this thing called an appositive. I'll show you what that is, a little sentence structure. Very easy to use. It's especially important when the author is an expert. Do not put the title of the article or the place of publication or any other information, just the author's last name, author's name and credentials. Here's an example. Let's do this. Let's look at these signal phrases. All of these have signal phrases. I'd like you to pause the video and I'd like you to say, are these effective or not based on what I've just put? So remember these qualities of the signal phrase and evaluate them. Pause the video now. All right, so the first one is good. According to Dr. Benjamin B. Leahy, a professor of psychology and epidemiology at the University of Chicago, blah, 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 blah. This is my appositive right here. This is a noun or noun phrase that explains who that is. Basically, it's just explaining who that is, all right? Notice I've got the credentials. That shows that this person is a reputable source. It says to my reader, hey, this is somebody you want to listen to. Leahy points out that blah, blah, blah. This is also good. The first time you can mention all of these details, but then after that, you can just say Leahy, or you could say, that's all you need is the last name. Number 3 is bad. Kathy said that social scientists defined grit as blah, blah, blah. Kathy, what? Kathy, who the heck's Kathy, right? That's a first name. Don't give first names. Number 4, according to Psychology Today, we can overcome trauma by forming a trauma narrative. Bad also. Don't give the place of publication. I don't want to know where it was published. I want to know the author. Now, this is going to be important later. Another lesson for later in the semester is how to cite sources, how to cite them correctly. You never want to cite it by the publication. You want to cite it by the author's last name. According to Amy Viglioti's article, Thriving After Loss, published in Psychology Today, again, too much information, TMI, okay? Just give me the author's last name and credentials. That's all we need. All right, I want to look at one other thing here. On number 2, we used a verb, points out, okay? This is a nice verb. A lot of writers just use said or wrote. Said, said, said. Said is a weak verb. It doesn't tell us much. Points out is more like, it tells me not only that Leahy said it, but it's a fact. By using the word points out, it's a known fact. So avoid weak verbs like says or writes. Use strong verbs to show your attitude toward the author. For somebody you agree with, you use something like observes, points out, notes, demonstrates, proves, reports. These are all indicate that these are true statements. On the other hand, if it's some liar that you're quoting and you want to show how that liar is a lying liar and I can't believe him, use a word like claims or implies or insinuates. These are better verbs. All right, that's a lot of information. It's a lot of work to incorporate into your first essay, but I want you to use that and use these sources very effectively. It makes a big difference to use sources effectively. Try them out immediately, as we're going to build on this. Later, we're going to learn how to cite your sources correctly. We're also going to learn how to do research and find better sources. All right, take care.